My name's Nathan Schmidt. I'm a film photographer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, mostly like fine art stuff. So the story of getting into photography is kind of an interesting one. I mostly was interested in filmmaking when I was younger, and actually for a long period of time didn't really think that photography or still photography was interesting or useful in any way. Mostly thought that filmmaking was kind of the logical extension of using an image like that. But then probably about 2 years ago or so, I actually got laid off from a job, had some free time, and just picked up shitty like Pentax KR that I had laying around for filmmaking and just started shooting stills with that. And it seemed like people enjoyed it, so I just kind of went along with that. And then after a period of time, got really interested in film photography, and that's much less expensive initially than digital photography, so I kind of ran with that, and it's been sort of a quasi obsession ever since. So the cameras that I use right now are the Nikon FM and the Mamiya RZ67. The Nikon FM I just got fairly recently, just trying to upgrade my SLR. I had a Pentax K1000 for pretty much the first year of shooting film, and I got that camera for $30 on Craigslist because the lady who was selling it had got it in a box and didn't know if it worked, and it didn't have a working light meter. So this one has a working light meter, which is immensely easier when trying to shoot pictures because you don't have to use your phone to meter. And then the RZ67, I got to upgrade my actually Mamiya 645 just to get kind of a bigger negative. Essentially, like most of the photographers in the style of photography that I do that I really enjoy are shooting 6x7, so I just kind of wanted a 6x7 camera badly. This one was fairly inexpensive, and the best part about it is that it has a rotating back, which for a 5-pound camera is really nice, especially with a waist level viewfinder, so you don't have to like look through it on the side. So yeah, those are what I have right now. I have a couple of extra cameras that I don't really use too much. I have a Canonet rangefinder, and then a couple of things that I'm basically just trying to get rid of at this point. Yeah, and my lens selection, I have like a 35 and a 50 for the Nikon, and then I just have the 160 for the Mamiya. I don't really, not one of the people that kind of takes a lot of stuff with them. Most of my style, even if it's portraits, I'll just take one camera and one lens, maybe two lenses. But I think my style, at least for portraits, is very much less focused on, I guess, like the technical aspect of taking the image and more focused on the emotional aspect of taking the image. I do have a vision going into things, how I want it to look. But typically when I'm shooting, the way that I find myself actually shooting during the shoot is sort of just like making a situation that I can find something that I want to take a picture of within it. Whether that be, a model and like how they look in a scene, or whether that be just like the model's facial expression in general. And as far as that goes, I like a very like neutral look, but it seems to be fairly easy to recognize when somebody's, kind of bullshitting a little bit. And I don't particularly like the look of a model that's being a model. I'm more so like, I like shooting models in that they're comfortable being in front of a camera, but I like to shoot that like genuine, like interaction, which actually takes a level of comfort. So you just get to where you want to be faster than you would with somebody who doesn't get their picture taken for a living, basically. And that's, again, also why I shoot kind of wider stuff. I hardly ever use the 50 millimeter. I'll use that almost only when I'm shooting studio stuff, just to make sure that I don't get the whole background in it. But if I'm outside, I pretty much exclusively shoot 35, and the 60 on the Mamiya is around like 30, 35 with the difference. And that's probably my favorite focal length. So my style, I kind of already got into that a little bit with portraits, but as far as like the more fine art side of things, you know, basically my style, without even realizing it until later on, is sort of reminiscent of an era in photography called like the New Topographics movement. It was like in the 60s and 70s with people like Stephen Shore and Joel Sternfield, people like that. And their stuff was really kind of a product of the times of like the 60s and 70s, where people were really starting to become disenchanted with that sort of like, you know, over the top consumerism sort of thing. And America is just full of that sort of like almost absurd backdrop in a way, where you know, you'll see like a Taco John's that has like a cathedral in the back of it, or you know, you see some people like recently I took some pictures at a protest, and the protest ended basically with a line going directly into a Starbucks. It's just stuff like that was you know, kind of the absurdity of life in general, but specifically like American life. And then, you know, more often than not, just from my own perspective and kind of the way that I take pictures being like a very solitary journey, those pictures end up being, you know, pretty empty. I feel like they always have kind of an aspect of solitude or like loneliness to them, which I feel like kind of explains America as a little bit as well. Yeah, and I'd say that's my style, I suppose. Typically how I shoot is just sort of like walking around. I occasionally will sort of drive around, and occasionally I'll bike around, but the only way that I really find myself getting into the vibe of the type of pictures that I like to take is by walking. I'm not like a street photographer by any means, because I don't really like to take, you know, pictures of people or whatever. But I definitely have a similar method as a street photographer, where I kind of like walk around. You sort of get like the ebb and flow, you feel the vibe of the place, and you kind of get a feel for the energy of it. And once you get that feeling, these sort of like compositions open up, where like you'll turn a corner and you'll have seen, for instance, like walking around a square that has a church in it, and you're just like, oh, like what's kind of a way that I can get an image of this church? It's really stark and beautiful. And then there's, you know, an abandoned Taco John's right there. And it's just like, oh, there it is. You know, like you kind of have to be very present in a way. And that's where one of my series comes from. It's like an ongoing series. And I call it meditation, or meditations rather. Because photography really did sort of take the place of meditation for me. I was super big into meditation for a while, and then kind of fell out of that, but then found photography. And when I'm out shooting, you know, I'm basically not really thinking about anything. I'm kind of just like feeling the vibe of a place, just walking around, you know, maybe listening to music or something like that. And, you know, whereas other people kind of spend a little bit more time working a scene and finding a composition that they like and being very meticulous about it. And I really appreciate that style. And, you know, sometimes I like working that way more. But I think my favorite images that I take really come from just like letting my instincts take over and just sort of feeling the response of my body to a composition that just like appears in front of me. And, you know, it's like, you walk past something and it like sends a jolt through your body, and it's like, oh wow, that's like really interesting, or like really pretty, or messed up, or whatever. And just kind of stop and take the picture of that thing that made me feel that way. And I guess the idea there is to just hope that somebody also feels that way when they look at it. So I think my style is probably more instinctual than it is sort of cultivated, I suppose, for better or worse. For projects, is sort of, you know, I kind of regard my photography as like two separate entities. So I have like the more fine art, contemporary landscape stuff, and then I have, you know, portraits. And I would say the shoot that probably stands out the most for me is I have a series called East of West, and that was shot during a road trip to Montana and back. And just, you know, that trip in general was, you know, one of the better trips that I've taken. Just a nice road trip through some insanely rural Montana, one of which was, you know, driving on a 27-mile long dirt road through the mountains at sunrise, or, you know, going through Montana has like Highway 1, and it's basically like a 55-mile-per-hour country road, and you'll go through this small town that has like 200 people in it, and then you'll drive for seriously like an hour, and then you'll hit another town. And, you know, I grew up in a town that has like 2,500 people in it, you know, like a half an hour away from here. And I thought that was rural. And like going to Montana, it's just like, that was not rural, what I grew up in. It's like, you know, takes you 2 hours to get to a movie theater, or like a half a day of driving to get to an airport or something like that. Like, and I think eventually I would like to get back there and do another series like in some of those towns. But the trip itself was to visit a friend of mine in Glacier National Park. So we kind of just like booked it through there, but hit a lot of cool sort of like classic Americana stuff on the way. The West is particularly good for that. And I think it's because there's so few people and it's so rural that there's really no reason, and really not even enough money to sort of like update the infrastructure or the sort of economy of those towns. So you get a lot of, you know, kind of like people still using a gas station from the 60s or anything like that. And yeah, so it's like, it's sort of a time capsule of the 60s and 70s, which is pretty interesting. So that's probably my most revered, if you can say that, or like it's the one project that I have that has gotten like attention online, and I showed some pieces of it at a gallery around here. Yeah, and it's my only project that I have so far that's, you know, completely enclosed, whereas my other projects that I have going on are still kind of going on. And then as far as portraits go, I think pretty much, you know, I'm not super happy with my portraits ever. So I feel like I'm still sort of learning how to make them better. And so due to that, I feel pretty much that every portrait session that I do is my favorite that I've done to that time. But recently I shot with kind of like a newer model from around here and clipped some like fern leaves behind her and did some studio stuff. And I still haven't gotten the scans back for that one, so we'll see if it looks any good, but I had a good feeling about it when I was shooting it. So yeah, I think for portrait sessions, really the thing that makes or breaks a portrait session for me is whether or not like the person that I'm taking pictures of is comfortable and like we connect. Not connect as like a photographer and a model, but just like have fun as like a friend, you know? Because I've shot with people where they're kind of uncomfortable the whole time, or they're too business oriented. And not that I don't appreciate that, like as a model, it's your job. As a photographer, it's my job, and I can really appreciate that. But just for me, portraits are very much about like an emotional connection, because I feel like the most important thing about a portrait is the eyes. And you can pretty much take every single element away from a picture except for the eyes, and you could still have a good picture. But you know, sort of on the other end of the spectrum, you could have the best equipment, have the best model that knows exactly how to pose her body, have like the coolest set, and have her sort of positioned in the best way that you possibly could. And if her eyes aren't conveying anything, I don't think it's going to be that good, because there's really nothing for you to connect with there emotionally. And you know, people often talk about like storytelling with photography, and I think in an image of a person, the one thing that's going to tell a story is the eyes. And even if that's a neutral look can still have a lot going on with eyes, and not just be sort of like somebody staring blankly. So yeah, I would say that's pretty much what makes or breaks a good portrait session for me. The advice that I would give to somebody who wants to get into photography is, you know, just to start doing it. I've had, you know, everybody knows, or everybody who does photography knows somebody who sort of lets the lack of equipment get in their way of taking photography. And I think if that's the position that you start out in, maybe you shouldn't do photography, because, you know, if it's going to be a hobby of yours and that's all you really want it to be, then, you know, come at it with whatever you want, and just as long as it makes you happy, keep doing it. But likewise, if it's like a deterrent to your happiness, don't do it. Or if it's making you like desire these things that you can't get, then don't do it. But, you know, if you really are willing to kind of take the hardship that comes with it, because it's not easy money by any means. You know, you can find yourself in positions where you can get money for it with maybe not having the best skills, or like you might not be the most artistic person, but ultimately, you know, photography still takes a lot of time. It's not like a get rich quick scheme. And, you know, especially if you're going to do art, or if you're going to do film photography, there's a lot of like failure that comes along with that. And there's also a lot of letdown, you know, like there's tons and tons of times that I've sent my stuff into a place and like never heard anything back, or, you know, applied for like a gallery or applied for a publication and just hear nothing back, or, you know, get a letter back that says like, thanks for applying, but we didn't choose your stuff this time. And I think that if you are coming at photography wanting to do that stuff, and you don't just have like this almost, you know, sick sort of obsession with photography, or this impulse that you just have to create images, then that's basically just going to be a couple of months of you being rejected, and then you're going to get bitter about it and stop doing it. So why even do that in the first place? Yeah, so, you know, if you really want to take pictures, you know, most people have a phone, even like an iPhone 5, you can take pictures on and make good images to start out with. And it's not like you have to immediately start making money doing that. You can just learn composition, learn editing. You know, most editing softwares on a phone will be somewhat correspondent with the editing capabilities of a computer program. So you can learn sort of like the basics of that and how to edit something on a phone, and that'll correspond and translate over to, you know, like whatever, like a $200 program on a computer. And same thing with a phone. You know, you can get an app for your iPhone that allows you to kind of put it in manual mode, and you can learn all that stuff on something that you already have. Film photography is honestly even easier. Go to a thrift shop or a Goodwill and buy a point and shoot for $4. Get a roll of Kodak Gold from Walgreens for $15, and for $20 plus 10 to develop, you know, you're already shooting. And at least for me, film photography is sort of like the budget plan for photography. So digital photography, you can spend $500 to get the $5,000 to get like good equipment that you need right off the bat, or you can get $100 SLR and some rolls of film and kind of like pay as you go. And that might eventually become $5,000, but it'll take you a while. And yeah, just kind of keep shooting. Shoot every day if you can. Shoot everything that you can, because you'll never know if like some discipline is something that you're really good at and that you really like unless you try it. So if a friend of yours shoots street, go shoot street with them. Somebody asks you to shoot an event, shoot the event. Try landscape, try portraits. And if you're not happy with something that you do, but you really want to do it, just keep doing it and keep learning. And there's a ton of resources on YouTube. And yeah, I mean, you don't even have to go to school, but there's also like really good programs all over the place at schools. And the one benefit perhaps of going to college for it is that you get to try materials that otherwise would be pretty difficult. Like I didn't go to college for photography, but I have friends who do. And you know, they're shooting like 4x5, 8x10 stuff that some of those cameras can be really, really expensive. And if you mess up an exposure, you know, that is theoretically like $20 basically for the you know, the negative and the development. So you kind of have to work your way up to that stuff if you're working on the side, but yeah, just kind of do it as much as you can and get better at it.